Hello, I'm not Sarah Wheaton, I'm Helen Collis. I'm the health editor at Politico. And I'll be delighted to welcome onto our stage next Oliver Bisazza, the Chief Executive Officer of MedTech Europe, to speak to me about what the MedTech sector is facing at the moment, some of the challenges they're facing. While we wait for this stage to be reorganized, a little bit of information about the sector. So the medical devices sector is hugely diverse in Europe. In fact, there are more than 2 million different types of medical technologies in use in the health systems in Europe. And these all fall into around 7,000 different categories. So it's a really complex sector with lots of different challenges for the companies that work in it. In Europe, there are more than 38,000 medical devices and technology companies, and the vast majority of these, 90% or more, are small and medium-sized companies. Europe's medical devices sector has undergone a series of changes over the recent years, and these include the medical devices regulation, the in vitro diagnostics regulation, as well as now the AI Act, which is going to be affecting a lot of the companies that are developing software and AI health tech that incorporates elements of AI. I'm going to be discussing some of these elements and more with Oliver in just a moment. Let me check the stage is ready. Okay. Okay then. Thank you, Oliver, for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So sticking with the theme of digital health and AI that we just had a discussion on, really interesting discussion just now with Deirdre. We know investors are really interested in AI, and there's a lot of talk about the kind of AI bubble at the moment. But how big is this bubble really? I'm really trying to get a flavour of how large the AI MedTech operation is in Europe. I know a lot of your companies at MedTech Europe are small and medium-sized businesses, but how many of them really are involved in digital and especially AI technology?
In digital, more than ever. I mean, the whole rhythm of our industry, as I think you said earlier, is it's an industry which takes innovation in the world of tech, wherever it is, and tries to apply it to healthcare. And we've done that since time immemorial, whether that's with mechanical engineering, material science, etc. Applying revolution in the digital and software space has been going on for a number of years. And ever since I first got involved in the sector 10, 15 years ago, I was already hearing software, digital, data, that is where most of the innovation is actually happening. And this latest enthusiasm for AI is just the most recent chapter of that. So how many are involved? I wouldn't have an exact number, but we've definitely long ago moved from the time where it was just a niche minority of the companies. I would struggle more to find companies which are only in the hardware and consumables space as much needed as those products are.
Wow, so it really is taking off then.
It's today, it's not the future. Yeah.
And we heard on the previous panel about some of the opportunities, but also some of the challenges in getting digital and AI technology to be adopted in health systems. What challenges have your members faced in experience bringing their products to market?
You know, the dilemma here is, as always, when you're dealing with healthcare and when you're dealing with innovation, you do need a certain amount of regulation for the patient safety, but also for the public trust. We've never been against regulation. The challenge is, if you look at what goes on in Europe, we have had for a number of years now, I'm going to say it, the most robust regulatory framework in the world for medical devices. The EU medical devices regulations, which have been progressively rolled in the last 8 years or so, probably the most demanding in the world. They set the highest level of evidence. They've been extraordinarily challenging to implement for everyone. And they're technology agnostic. So they are by design meant to be applicable regardless of whether your device is digital, hardware, or anything else. So the challenge is not that Europe came with new regulations on AI and data and all the things of the first von der Leyen Commission, but the way it was done, unfortunately, for sectors like ours, which are already highly regulated, it seemed to add a second layer of requirements on top of an already highly regulated system. a new set of requirements, negotiated, by the way, by non-healthcare policymakers sometimes. And the compliance with those requirements looked like they had to be assessed again by a new regulatory body. We were facing basically the threat of double regulation, having to go through one very burdensome medical device regulatory approval, and then a second level of AI or health data approval, which was unfortunately going to take SMEs and their investors to breaking point. And so we're very interested to see what comes out of the digital omnibus packages that are scheduled for release today, because it looks like the Commission, at least, is going to attempt some action to restore some sanity to that landscape.
Thank you. One of the things I have been hearing from companies, especially in the US, is that we've heard a lot this morning that Europe has one of the most progressive, if you like, regulatory environments for AI and MedTech, or at least one best established. Could this be a competitive advantage for Europe? I have heard a couple of companies tell me that jumping through Europe's hoops to get onto the market here is actually seen as a stamp of kind of gold standard when they go to the US and try to launch there. Is that something you're hearing?
It is definitely the case that for many, many years, companies used to get their regulatory approvals for MedTech in Europe first. And it was then a very well-established launching pad for rolling out innovation worldwide. A number of countries around the world still want and trust and request the EU regulatory approvals because they are seen as having great global standing. The challenge is, if you're an innovator, if you're an SME, if you have a great piece of tech with venture capital behind it, and you're under pressure to roll it out to one healthcare system or more somewhere, you're not going to go to Europe if Europe is coming with the most burdensome, unpredictable, and time-consuming rules. It's just not going to happen. Your investors won't allow that to happen. They are going to require you to go to that part of the world where there's regulation, but smart regulation that gets you to a final decision. Yes, I'm approved. No, I'm not approved. In the time frame you were told, after going through the hoops you thought you were going to have to jump through. If you've got that unpredictable landscape, which has emerged in Europe in the last few years, fewer and fewer companies are going to take a bet on that. So yes, it's true, but it kind of doesn't really match the reality anymore because it assumes people will still come here first.
Yeah. And you did mention a few countries request EU approval first. Can you tell us which countries they are?
Oh, we counted when the new EU rules on medical devices came out 8 years ago, more than 100 countries around the world which were leveraging the European CE marking, as it's called, in one way or another. Maybe they wanted it for local regulatory registrations, maybe it was to facilitate tenders or even customs clearance. This was very widespread, for instance, in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, but also Australia and some countries in Latin America would leverage these approvals in one way because they trusted and respected the EU approval as being to a good quality standard.
Interesting.
Yeah, there are many. Yeah.
And when it comes to actually getting onto the market, we're hearing from some software developers of AI technology, for example, in the healthcare system, that they don't really feel like they've got a path to market. There isn't really a clearer regulatory and reimbursement pathway for them. They don't fall into the health technology assessment regulatory legislation, and are finding it hard to show the added value to health systems. What are you hearing from your members on that, and how can we solve this problem?
This is also a very important one. So, today with the omnibus and other things, we're talking about the EU regulation, which is about, having passed the necessary steps to lawfully be placed on the market. Very important, but then you're absolutely right. In healthcare, that's not the end of the story. You then need to go through the market access landscape and be embraced by hospitals and healthcare systems, procured, reimbursed, whatever the pathway is. What I've been hearing anecdotally for a number of years is even those innovators who have made it, right? They've got a technology which works, it gets through regulatory approval. In some parts of Europe, that might not fit so easily into the way the healthcare system is structured. This is more a national competence than an EU one, to be clear, so I don't expect Brussels to necessarily solve that. But when you've got healthcare systems, for instance, which incentivize a minimum number of hospital admissions, where they reward a certain number of days in the hospital, where if your technology enables the surgery to be avoided altogether and save everyone money that's actually not incentivized at all, then actually you've got a system where the national market access landscape is not caught up to the innovation. And that's a very important conversations for the member states to be having, because this tech is coming and it is going to go to those healthcare systems which are ready for it. The question is Europe going to structure its healthcare systems to embrace it?
I've seen that the UK's National Institute for Clinical Excellence, NICE, which does the health technology assessments, is actually looking at AI technology. And should we be thinking about whether the EU HTA regulation should also be pulling in assessments of AI technology for Europe?
Right, so in the HTA space, health technology assessment is historically not done for very many medical devices, certainly way fewer proportion of MedTech than medicines undergo HTA, but it has been slowly ticking up. And if you look at the new EU regulation on health technology assessment, the first assessments on medical devices haven't really kicked off yet, but the range of devices in scope will include some of the higher risk AI systems. So there is clearly an interest from the HTA agencies to look into it. To answer your question though, if I'm very frank, our industry has always looked with cautious skepticism at the HTA landscape, because it's meant on paper to facilitate market access and market uptake of innovative technologies. On paper, that's what it's declared to be used for. But too often than not, and this is not just a European phenomenon, by the way, too often than not, HTA agencies around the world seem to have used those assessments as a reason not to invest in tech and innovation, or to delay their investment in innovation. What do I mean by that? I mean that if your HTA is done and the outcome is not favorable, you can be guaranteed you're going to get punished for that and you're not going to have your technology reimbursed. But the opposite is not necessarily true. Oftentimes, if you get a positive HTA assessment, there's no reward for it. It's more like they have not found an excuse to delay the investment in technology. So that's the little bit the industry's love-hate relationship with HTA. On paper, it's meant to facilitate the uptake of needed innovation to address unmet needs, but oftentimes it looks like a stalling tactic not to invest in the innovation that healthcare needs. Sorry to say.
I see. I want to talk a little bit about data in the last few minutes. We know how important clean, reliable, and diverse data is for the creation of digital AI technology and unbiased algorithms. To what extent is finding this perfect data a challenge to AI health tech developers today? And will the European health data space legislation, once it's operable, help with that?
Yeah, this is a great question, thank you, because once we've cracked the AI problem, and we will one way or another, at the end of the day, AI is only as good as the data you fuel into it. So I was having some fascinating conversations last night about just how error-prone some AI systems can be if it's just using any old data from the web. So AI's potential is more likely to be delivered upon when we feed it with truly robust data. And there is a wealth of health data in the system. We all know it is of mixed quality and it's unstructured right now. But yes, in order to actually use the potential of this technology, we and other life sciences industries have said we need a certain degree of access to the health data which is out there and which is guaranteed to be a good quality. The big question with the European health data space has been precisely, will it facilitate responsible access to the data that's needed, or will it put up barriers? There's a lot of conversation about making the health data in EHDS accessible to the researchers and the public sector, but there's been a bit of sensitivity about giving the private sector access to that data. But that's precisely the player in the system which can do a lot to innovate if it has it. So that's an important choice as we implement the EHDS. How much are we going to entrust everyone and to the health data that's out there, knowing that we already have a very high standard of data protection in Europe vis-a-vis other regions of the world.
And do you know if there are any countries, any markets in Europe especially, that have such great data and access to data where developers are really choosing to build and train their technology on?
That's a bit outside my area of expertise, I'm afraid.
No trouble.
Yeah. I'm a Brussels guy, for better or worse.
Well, the other elephant in the room is after years of waiting, we're going to get the reform of the medical devices regulation by the end of the year. So I wonder if you've got any hopes that things that you're expecting to see, or maybe you know are going to be in it.
I mean, I will freely admit we are relieved and excited about this. We've been saying for a number of years that there is tons of necessary opportunity to simplify the rules on medical devices. As Sandra Galina said very eloquently just here yesterday morning, Europe unfortunately found itself on the receiving end of some very unfortunate and avoidable device shortages in the last couple of years. And the regulatory overhaul of the last few years is cited as one of the key reasons why. I think it was the Politico event last year, or 1 or 2 years ago, where an Irish pediatric cardiologist was talking in very emotional terms about how he's had to potentially choose whether he can continue operating on babies because of the shortages of medical devices. So yes, we absolutely want to get this right. We will see what's in the European Commission proposal on 16th of December, but all the public statements that have been made so far suggest that we and others in the sector have been listened to very, very seriously. So I'm cautiously optimistic that this will go after some of the right things. The key question, of course, is not what's in a Commission proposal, but what will come out the other end once the European Parliament and the member states have had their crack at it. So I would really encourage all the co-legislators, whether it's the medical device rules or the omnibus rules, to get these over the finish line in a way which actually delivers timely simplification so that this dream of European competitiveness can be realized and not just talked about and forgotten.
Lovely. Thank you, Oliver, and right on time. That's all we've got time for discussing this morning. Thank you for joining us and for sharing your insights, especially on the AI MedTech sector, which is obviously growing very quickly. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We now have a break in the networking room, and we'll be back shortly. Thank you.
Are united in diversity. We are very heterogeneous in our opinion.
We are doing this in our open democracies. Discussion is all open and loud, and I'm not for that.
What is European Union? What is freedom? How we learn together.
The obvious question is, what is the EU doing? What is our plan?